Talking Foreign Policy, a critical look at Canada's role abroad, and I am Eve Engler. Today, we are lucky to have with us Ramzy Baroud, who is an author and editor of the Palestine Chronicle, to discuss really little discussed element of Canada's support for Israel's dispossession of Palestinians. In recent days, Palestinian Authority security forces have violently repressed resistance in Jenin. This is remarkable amidst the Holocaust going on in Gaza. But this fits with a longer term pattern of Palestinian Authority suppressing opposition to Israel's illegal occupation. Canada has actually significantly assisted in this endeavor. Over the past 2 decades, Canada has spent hundreds of millions of dollars in aid money to train, equip, accompany Palestinian Authority security forces. Through Operation Proteus, Canada has about 2 dozen soldiers and a handful of RCMP agents in the West Bank assisting the United Nations or United States Security Coordinator building up a PA force to oversee Israel's occupation of the West Bank. So first of all, thanks a lot for coming on, talking foreign policy, Ramzy. And could you give us a little bit about what's been going on in Jenin in recent days?
Absolutely. So, first of all, thank you for having me, Eve. What's going on in Jenin is a story that keeps repeating itself. Jenin is a very small area. There's a refugee camp of Jenin, and there is the town of Jenin. And most of the people in the town are essentially now refugees as well. They all come from historic Palestine as a result of the Nakba or the Great Catastrophe, when the Zionist militias pushed Palestinians out of their historic homeland and they became refugees. The thing about Jenin is that actually most of the people who live in Jenin come from areas in today's Israel where they can actually see where they come from. They see the towns and the land and and the orchards from which they were evicted or ethnically cleansed all these years ago, 76 years ago. And that makes Jenin kind of the connection between the refugees of Jenin and the Palestinian homeland even more emotional than ever. I've done a book about Jenin called Searching Jenin with the help of Noam Chomsky. That was in 2002. And I interviewed many, many people in Jenin who pretty much kind of constantly tell the same story that we can actually see Palestine from here. And for them, that means a great deal. And I think that also played a role of why the resistance in Jenin never really stopped. There has never been a period in the history of Palestinian struggle in which Jenin was outside the paradigm of resistance. And this also explains why Israel is always after Jenin, trying to subdue Jenin. Because for them, Jenin is always the spark. It's the spark of bigger rebellions, bigger revolutions. So if they teach Jenin a lesson in their own thinking, they would, be a bit more certain than the rest of the West Bank is not going to follow suit. So it plays that kind of significance. And in many ways, Jenin has also existed outside the parameters of control imposed by the Palestinian Authority on behalf of Israel. So when the Palestinian Authority right now, they have been putting Jenin under siege for nearly 2 weeks. They raided Jenin repeatedly. They killed several people in there. They've arrested many people in Jenin. In their mind, they feel that Jenin has, you know, kind of kind of represents a bad model of how the Palestinian Authority would like to run the West Bank. They would like to see themselves, or they do see themselves, in fact, they are kind of a police force working on behalf of the Israeli occupation in the West Bank. So as of late, the Israelis have been telling the Palestinian Authority, you haven't been doing a good job in in the tasks that you have been entrusted with, namely subduing the dissidents and the resistance, and anyone calling for any sort of rebellion or revolution or resistance against the Israeli occupation. Last August, Israel attacked Jenin for about 10 days. They killed a whole lot of people. They wounded many. They arrested many. And they essentially destroyed the infrastructure of the entire place. Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Authority, comes in shortly after the Israelis leave, and he basically threatens the people. I mean, just to show you how these two forces, the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli occupation, they work hand in hand. He threatened the people. He said, any arm that operates outside the Palestinian Authority will be cut off. So the Israelis come and they carry out a massacre in Jenin. The Palestinian Authority comes, and by the way, Mahmoud Abbas goes in there with at least 1,500 soldiers. 1,500 soldiers who did not raise a finger when Jenin was being attacked and raided, and many people were being massacred. They were just outside watching. The Israelis leave, the Palestinian Authority goes in. I just find it frustrating, honestly, Eva. Why are we so careful about placing the Palestinian Authority or defining it in the proper words? The Palestinian Authority is a collaborating authority that works for the Israeli occupation. A lot of people are hesitant to use these words for various reasons, but at the end of the day, this is what how the Palestinians, not only of Jenin, but most of the West Bank perceive the Palestinian Authority, that they are collaborators with Israel. Now, the latest attack on Jenin, I believe, is very much related to the advent of Donald Trump to office. Trump has sent his envoys. They are in Saudi Arabia, in the Emirates, in Jordan, in Turkey, and they have met with so many different individuals and entities and governments. And the message is basically Trump is trying to kind of send, his ambassadors to the region to let them know what he is expecting, and just the timing of how the Palestinian Authority is trying to flex its muscles against the Palestinians in Jenin and elsewhere in the West Bank is really related to them trying to communicate to the Trump administration that we can be trusted. That what happened in the previous or the first term of the Trump administration, when the likes of Jared Kushner has decided to surpass the Palestinian Authority altogether and to normalize with the Arabs without the involvement of Mahmoud Abbas. And that's where that famous phrase, the Palestinians can either put up or shut up. Mahmoud Abbas feels that this time around he wants to start on the right foot by communicating to the Trump administration, I am a partner, I can be trusted. In fact, while my people are being massacred, slaughtered in Gaza, I am actually helping Israel establish its authority and its total control over any Palestinian in the West Bank who dares resist the Israeli occupation. In other words, I think it's now very, very clear that the Palestinian Authority stands wholly on the side of Israel with no regards whatsoever to the welfare of the Palestinian people.
And in one sense, this is obviously totally remarkable to see all the slaughter in Gaza and Hezbollah providing some resistance to that. You see Ansar Allah providing some resistance, some Iraqi groups, and yet the Palestinian Authority is repressing Palestinians that trying to engage in some resistance in response to Israel's abundant violations of all different norms. But if you think about it historically, colonial authorities have always looked to compliant domestic groups or to do their dirty work and to oversee their colonial regime. That, of course, was the case with the British in India. And so obviously Israel, does the same thing. What is a bit different in this case is that so you have this Palestinian Authority that's a sort of subcontractor of the occupation, but it's actually kind of third party countries that are doing this training and assistance to the Palestinian Authority security forces, which are all vetted by the Shin Bet, the Israeli intelligence. So could you talk a little bit about, you already talked about this, the Palestinian Authority is subcontractor of the occupation, but a little bit about the United States Security Coordinator and this Palestinian force that they've built up that we'll get more to in a second, that Canada's played a very important role in doing, but that's now, I believe it's into the, I saw one number saying as many as 35,000 Palestinian security forces. I know previously it was around 10,000, but can you get a bit more of this force that the United States security coordinator is sort of building up and using as this arm of essentially of the Israeli occupation?
Right. So the Palestinian Authority, when it first started after the Oslo Agreement, so you have the Oslo Agreement 1993, then you have the Palestinian Authority kind of taking its first steps towards becoming, that kind of, supposedly the platform from which a Palestinian state was going to spring up at one point, and there will be final status negotiations that was dated, I think, to September 1999. So everything was supposed to be, like the Palestinian Authority was supposed to be a national leadership that found some kind of a middle ground between the revolutionary rhetoric of the past and a pragmatic politics for the future. Of course, there was no final status negotiations to begin with, and with time there was a culture that was espoused amongst a certain class of Palestinians, where the revolutionaries of the past became kind of the iron fist of the Israeli occupation, cracking down on any Palestinian, be it an Islamist, a socialist, a secularist, but any Palestinian who dare defy the Israeli occupation, and they would crack down on these entities or these individuals in the name of, we know what is good for Palestine. We have a plan. What you are doing is actually hurting the overall plan that we have, and there will be a Palestinian state and all the good stuff. Well, at one point it became clear to everybody, including the Palestinian Authority itself, that there will be no Palestinian state, and there is no gold at the end of the rainbow, or however they say it. It was the whole thing was a scam, but during this process of scamming the Palestinian people with Oslo and so-called peace process, a certain group of Palestinians became extremely wealthy. Revolutionaries who used to wear military fatigues became millionaires. Mansions started springing up from Ramallah to Beeri to Bethlehem to Tiri and other places throughout the West Bank. There was a kind of a greater Ramallah island of the wealthy Palestinians who are doing Israel's bidding against the Palestinians who are living on the margins. Jenin, Nablus, Hebron, and other places, Jericho, where the poverty and unemployment and the refugees live in these refugee camps. So you ended up having two classes of people. One small class that's situated in Ramallah, and another that is situated elsewhere, and they are suffering, mostly living in Area B and Area C, and they are suffering greatly under the Israeli occupation. But Palestinian Authority goons did not seem to notice that. They have VIP cards, they go through military checkpoints, they go to conferences, they fly all over the world talking about the revolution and the peace and the compromises and all of that. When the second intifada happened, there was a direct clash between that poorer classes, majority Palestinians, but the poorer Palestinians who rebelled. They rebelled against Israel, but also in doing so, they rebelled against the Palestinian Authority. And many of the police officers, the rank and file of the PA, actually joined the revolution or joined the Intifada. And that's when the Americans and the Canadians and the Jordanians and the Egyptians and many others came in and they said, okay, time out. That wasn't the plan. The plan was the Palestinian Authority is working for us, not working for the Palestinians. And that's when they developed the U.S. government developed this concept. They called it the New Palestinian. They wanted to invest in a new type of Palestinian who would actually be decidedly on the side of Israel. And that's when they invested a great deal in, they let go of many old Palestinian fighters, the kind of old PLO fighters, old Fatah fighters, and they invested in a new generation of people who are supposedly brainwashed, trained by the CIA, trained by the Canadian forces, trained by Jordanians, by Egyptians. Every bullet and every gun and every military fatigue that made it to these fighters or these so-called security forces in the West Bank was sanctioned by Israel, was shipped by Israel. So you're talking about end of the Second Intifada 2005. all the way until today. You are looking here at nearly 20 years. You are looking at almost a whole generation of that new Palestinian who is basically ready to fight for Israel. And these are the ones who raided Jenin. These are the ones who are killing Palestinians. These are the ones who are torturing on behalf of Israel while their people are going through the genocide in Gaza. Governments like the Canadian governments and of course the Americans, but the Americans are lost cause in that sense. But many of these governments that give the impression that they are helping the Palestinians stand on their feet. They are helping the Palestinian establish this new concept of statehood, building as institutions that will be the institutions that supposedly will govern the new state of Palestine. In actuality, they are doing the opposite. There is no Palestinian statehood. There is no real Palestinian institutions. What you have there is that this governmental apparatus that is largely situated within so-called security and largely aims at keeping the coordinations between Israel, the Israeli occupation, and the Palestinian Authority alive to protect the Israeli military and the settlers as well. The political discourse that comes from the Palestinian Authority to the rest of the world gives the impression that the PA is still solidly on the side of the Palestinians, but what is happening in Palestine is an entirely different story.
And that segues nicely to this very important quote of Canada's relations to Palestinians from the head of Canada's International Development Agency back in 2012. And at that point, the Palestinian Authority was pushing this statehood bid at the UN. And the then Harper government threatened to cut off Canadian aid to Palestinians if it moved forward with the statehood bid. And the head of the Canadian International Development Agency, Margaret Biggs, at the time, puts this internal note that was later revealed by Post Media a year later in Access to Information. And she says, quote, "The emergence of popular protests on the Palestinian street against the Palestinian Authority is worrying, and the Israelis have been imploring the international donor community to continue to support the Palestinian authorities." She goes on to say, "The Israelis have noted the importance of Canada's contribution to the relative stability achieved through extensive security cooperation between Israel and the Palestinian Authority." So she's basically saying that Canada's aid to the Palestinians is designed to repress Palestinian opposition to the Israeli colonial authority. And this was something that we knew already. I mean, I personally had written about this much before this note became public. But this was just the confirmation from the head of the Canada's aid agency that this is what Canada was doing. Now, one of the things that's interesting about this note was that it was reported on by Post Media, which is right wing, very pro Israel media outlet. Um, and then it was just never mentioned again. Basically, it just went down the memory hole. And unfortunately, it still very much summarizes, I think, what Canada is doing through Operation Proteus in the West Bank today. Yeah, do you have any just sort of comments on that, and I guess on Canada's role, or just more generally?
Well, the Canadian position, by the way, is like it's a carbon copy of the American position. I mean, they have made it clear that the money that goes to the Palestinian Authority has to be seen in two different ways. You have the money that goes to the Palestinian Authority as in salaries, supporting the economy and all of that. But then you have that amount of money that goes directly to help the so-called security forces of the Palestinian Authority to block or stop or subdue these mass protests, which any democratic country in the world should be welcoming people peacefully protesting in the street. But of course, when it comes to the Palestinians, that's a direct threat to Israel's so-called security. By the way, the Trump administration has done the same thing, Eve, when they cut off money, the $200+ million to UNRWA during the first term of Donald Trump. And they also cut off money to the Palestinian Authority, but they kept, I think that's $70 million, if my memory doesn't fail me, $70 million that we're going to the so-called security coordinations, meaning that will allow the Palestinian Authority to subdue the Palestinian people, shall they protest or rise against the Israeli occupation. The Canadian government is following the American diktats on this issue. So no one can play innocent here. Nobody can claim that, well, the radical extremist position is only coming from Washington and Canada is different and is playing kind of a more soft role in which they are supporting Palestinians in building political establishments or institutions. They're not. They are doing exactly what the Americans are doing or what the Americans are telling them to do. So at the end of the day, the Canadian government is actually doing everything in its power to actually hurt the political aspirations of the Palestinian people, not the other way around.
Thanks a lot for coming on talking foreign policy to discuss this very important issue that's under discussed. Thanks a lot. People can check out Palestine Chronicle and Ramzy's books, I presume at the different libraries and bookstores. Thanks a lot for coming on talking foreign policy.
Thank you very much.